Clara Bennett stepped onto that platform with her chin lifted and both daughters pressed into her sides, and she made herself one promise: she would not cry. Not here. Not in front of every soul in Red Hollow who had come out on a Tuesday morning to watch her be sold. She had nothing left. No house, no land, no husband. Just two little girls, and the last shred of something that used to be called pride. They were already laughing. She could hear them. And then the crowd went completely silent. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to Red Hollow, Texas. Summer of 1887. And a woman who was about to meet the one person on Earth who would never laugh at her. The auctioneer's voice cut through the August heat like a blade. Up next, Clara Bennett, widow of the late Samuel Bennett, deceased in the railroad accident of last spring. 34 years of age. Two daughters, ages 12 and 7. Property seized by First Territorial Bank. She is available for domestic arrangement or formal marriage contract. Bidding starts at $40. $40. Clara heard the number and felt something collapse inside her chest that she had no name for. She stood on the wooden platform they had built in the center of Red Hollow's main street. The same street where she used to walk Samuel home from the feed store on Friday evenings. The same street where Ellie had learned to ride a horse. The same street where people used to tip their hats at her and ask how she was keeping. Now those same people stood in a half-circle below her with the particular expression she had come to know very well over the last 4 months, a mixture of pity and entertainment, the way you might look at a dog limping across a yard. Her older daughter Ellie stood on her left, 12 years old, and already furious in the way only a 12-year-old who has lost everything can be. Ellie had her jaw set and her fists tight at her sides, and she was staring at the crowd like she was memorizing faces. Clara had told her just before they climbed the steps of that platform, "Do not say a word. Whatever they say, you do not respond. Do you hear me?" Ellie had said, "Yes, Mama." But her eyes had said something else entirely. On Clara's right, Rose pressed her small face against her mother's arm and said nothing at all. 7 years old and already learning that sometimes the most dignified thing a person can do is go quiet. Rose had inherited that quality from Samuel. Samuel, who never once in 11 years of marriage raised his voice. "Do we have an opening bid?" the auctioneer called out. Silence. Then from somewhere near the back, a man named Hector Briggs, who owned the dry goods store and had 3 times offered to buy Clara's farmland at half its value, called out, "I'll give 30 for the older girl. Put her to work in the kitchen." Clara's hand shot out and gripped Ellie's wrist before the girl could step forward. "She's not for sale separately," the auctioneer said, though without particular conviction. "Then I ain't buying." Briggs crossed his arms. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. From the other side of the street, a woman Clara had considered a friend for nearly a decade. Margaret Holloway, who ran the church auxiliary, leaned toward her neighbor and said loud enough to carry, "I don't know why anyone would take on that much. She can barely move, let alone work a ranch." The neighbor murmured agreement. "And 2 girls at that. Just 2 more mouths." Clara kept her eyes forward. She had practiced this. She had stood in front of the broken mirror in the boarding house room, where the 3 of them had been sleeping on one bed for 6 weeks, and she had practiced keeping her face still. She had told herself that whatever they said, she had heard worse in her own head at 3 in the morning. She had told herself that she was doing this for Ellie and Rose, and that whatever humiliation she swallowed today was just the price of keeping them together. She had practiced all of that. But nothing quite prepares you for standing in the August sun while the woman who taught Sunday school to your children discusses your body like a piece of livestock that nobody wants to purchase. $40, the auctioneer repeated. "Do I have $40 for the widow and both children?" More silence. A man near the front, young, red-faced, already drunk at 11 in the morning, cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "She'd need to lose about 100 pounds before I'd spend 40 cents. The laughter that followed was not the polite kind. Ellie made a sound low in her throat. "Ellie." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. Look at me." Ellie looked at her. Her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears and not quite rage, but lived somewhere between the two. "We're going to be all right," Clara told her daughter. "You hear me?" "How?" Ellie whispered back. "Mama, how are we going to be all right?" Clara had no answer for that. She turned her face forward again and waited. The auctioneer shifted his weight and mopped his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked uncomfortable, which Clara supposed was something. $35, he said, adjusting the opening. 35 for all three. From the left side of the crowd, a heavy-set rancher named Dowd raised one finger. "I'll take 35, but only if the children go to separate placement. I got no use for two young girls underfoot." "They stay together," Clara said. The auctioneer turned to her with a look of mild surprise, as though the merchandise had spoken out of turn. "Ma'am, my daughters stay with me. That is the condition. Anyone who bids understands that is the condition." Dowd lowered his finger. The auctioneer sighed. Somewhere behind Clara she heard Rose whispering something. She glanced back and saw her younger daughter with her lips moving and her eyes closed, and Clara realized with a pain so sudden it nearly doubled her over that Rose was praying. 7 years old in front of a crowd of strangers, silently asking God for something her mother couldn't give her. That was the moment Clara felt the first tear threaten. She blinked it back hard. She was not going to cry. She was not going to give them that. And then the crowd shifted. It was subtle at first, just a change in the way people were standing, a redirecting of attention from the platform toward something at the back of the gathered assembly. Clara noticed it before she saw the cause. She noticed it because the laughter stopped. The murmuring stopped. A particular quality of quiet settled over the street that she had never experienced before. The kind of quiet that has weight in it. Then the crowd parted. Not because anyone asked them to. They simply moved. The way water moves around a stone that doesn't ask permission. The man who walked through that parted crowd was tall. Not merely tall the way a lot of frontier men were tall from hard work and hard living. Tall in the way that some people are simply assembled differently from others. He was broad through the shoulders and lean everywhere else. He wore a dark hat pulled low and a canvas coat that had seen more weather than most men see in a lifetime. His face was weathered and scarred, a long pale scar running from his left cheekbone down toward his jaw, and he walked with the unhurried, deliberate step of someone who had long ago stopped caring what anyone thought of the pace he set. Clara did not know him, but she could see from the behavior of every person he walked past that they knew him. Dowd had taken a half-step backward. Even the drunk young man near the front had gone very still. The man stopped at the edge of the platform. He tilted his head back slightly and looked up at Clara. And then he looked at Ellie. And then he looked at Rose, who had opened her eyes at the new silence, and was now staring at him with an expression that Clara could only describe as careful. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Mr. Harper, we didn't expect to see you in town today. Expect to see." The man Harper didn't look at the auctioneer. He was still looking at Clara. His eyes were a pale gray that Clara associated with winter sky, and there was nothing easy in them, nothing warm, nothing that invited conversation. But there was also nothing cruel. She had seen cruel eyes. She knew the difference. "What's the bid?" Harper said. His voice was low and unhurried. $35 for the widow, and both 100. The auctioneer blinked. The crowd made a sound like a collective intake of breath. $100, Harper said again without changing his tone. For the widow, and the girls come with her. All conditions the woman named stand. They stay together. Clara stared at him. She didn't know if this was rescue or just a different kind of catastrophe. She had learned in the last 4 months that you couldn't always tell the difference immediately. "Sir, I need to confirm." The auctioneer began. "Do you have another bid?" Harper asked. Silence. "Then we're done here." Harper reached into the inside pocket of his coat and produced a fold of bills. He counted out $100 with the unhurried precision of a man paying for something he'd already decided on before he arrived, and he laid them on the wooden rail at the edge of the platform. He looked up at Clara again. "Ma'am," he said, "I apologize for the indignity of this process. When you're ready to come down, I'll be waiting." He stepped back. He did not offer his hand. He did not smile. He turned partially away, giving her space, and stood with his hat slightly lowered against the sun. For approximately 10 seconds, nobody in Red Hollow said a single word. Then Margaret Holloway spoke, and Clara would remember the words for the rest of her life because of how perfectly they summarized everything she had been fighting against. "What on earth does Cole Harper want with a woman like that?" Ellie heard it. Of course she heard it. Ellie heard everything. "He wants her." Ellie said clear and firm, loud enough to carry because she's worth wanting. A few people near the front turned to look at the 12-year-old standing on the auction platform, in her mended dress and worn shoes, and the look on Ellie's face apparently discouraged further comment. Clara put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart." She looked at Rose. "Both of you." They came down the steps together. Clara approached the man named Cole Harper, with her daughters at her sides, and the weight of every stare in Red Hollow pressing against her back, and she stopped when she was close enough to speak without the whole street hearing. "Mr. Harper," she said, "I need to understand something before we go any further." He looked at her with those winter sky eyes and waited. "I am not a charity case," Clara said. "I have nothing to offer you in terms of property or income. My debts have been cleared by the bank seizing the farmhouse, so you won't inherit those. What you would be taking on is myself and my 2 daughters, and I will work alongside you for whatever arrangement you have in mind. But I need to know your intentions are honest, because I have 2 children to protect, and I will do that with whatever I have left in me." Something moved across Cole Harper's face. Not quite surprise, not quite respect, something in between. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "My intentions are marriage, a legal arrangement. You and the girls under my roof, my protection. I have a ranch in the Montana Territory not close to anything which I'll warn you about before we travel. The work is hard, the winters are harder." He paused. "But the land is yours as much as mine if you choose to stay." "Why?" Clara asked. Harper was quiet for a moment. "Because I watched that for 20 minutes, he said, "and nobody else did anything." Clara studied his face for signs of deception. She had been poor, she had been desperate, she had been public property on an auction block, and still she studied his face because she had also learned that desperation is the exact moment when a person most needs to trust their own judgment. She found nothing she recognized as dishonest. "All right," she said. Behind her, she heard the crowd begin to murmur. The particular frequency of collective disapproval laced with fascination. She heard fragments. "Cole Harper of all people," and "Those poor girls don't know what they're walking into," and the voice of Dowd the rancher saying flatly, "He'll send them back inside a week." She did not turn around. "Ellie," she said quietly. "Rose, this is Mr. Harper. We're going to go with him now." Rose, who had said almost nothing through the entire ordeal, looked up at Cole Harper with the directness that only 7-year-olds and certain very old women seem capable of. "Do you have a dog?" she asked. Harper blinked. It was, Clara noticed, the first time anything had touched his expression. "No," he said. "Oh." Rose considered this. "We had a dog named Biscuit. He had 3 legs. Papa said he was the bravest dog in Texas." "What happened to him?" Harper asked, and his voice was just barely different, a fraction softer. "He died the same month Papa did," Rose said simply. "I think he was lonely." Cole Harper looked at the 7-year-old for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll see what I can do about a dog." Rose nodded, satisfied, as though this settled something important. Ellie looked at Clara with an expression of cautious assessment that belonged on someone 3 times her age. Clara gave her a small nod. Ellie gave Harper a long measuring look. "If you hurt my mother," she said quietly, "you'll wish you hadn't." Harper didn't flinch. He didn't dismiss her. He looked at Ellie with what Clara could only describe as seriousness, genuine, unpatronizing seriousness, and said, "I believe you." Ellie seemed to find this acceptable. They walked to the far end of the street, where Harper's wagon stood loaded with supplies. Clara climbed onto the bench with Rose pressed against her side, and Ellie climbed up without assistance and sat very straight, and Cole Harper untied the horses and lifted himself onto the driver's side with an efficiency of movement that suggested everything about him had been stripped to the essential long ago. He turned the wagon north. Behind them, Red Hollow watched them go. Clara did not look back at the town that had stood in a semicircle and watched her be auctioned in the August heat. She did not look back at the church where she'd been married to Samuel, or the corner where the farmhouse had stood before the bank, put the notice on the door, or the face of Margaret Holloway, who would spend the next 5 years telling anyone who would listen that Cole Harper had simply lost his mind. She looked forward. The road out of Red Hollow was rutted and pale with dust, cutting north through scrub grass and cedar breaks toward the far horizon, where the land began to lift into something that wasn't Texas anymore. At her side, Rose leaned her small head against Clara's arm and closed her eyes. Across the bench, Cole Harper drove with both hands easy on the reins and his eyes on the road ahead, and he did not speak, and Clara did not speak, and the silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people who have each in their own separate way learned to carry more than they should and have made their peace with the weight. After perhaps half an hour, Ellie said from Clara's other side, "Are you the one they call the scarred cowboy?" Harper glanced at her. "Some people." "Because of the scar on your face?" "Partly." "What's the other part?" Harper was quiet for a moment. "There are other things people don't care to cross me about." Ellie absorbed this. "What kind of things?" "Ellie," Clara said. "No, it's a fair question," Harper said. He thought for another moment. "I don't allow cruelty. Not to animals. Not to people who can't defend themselves. Some men take offense at that." Ellie was quiet for longer than usual. Then she said, "Papa was like that." Clara's throat tightened. Harper didn't respond to this immediately. After a moment he said, "Your father sounds like he was a decent man." "He was the best man," Ellie said. "He was better than anyone in that town." "Then you already know what a decent man looks like," Harper said, "which means you'll know quickly enough whether I'm one." Ellie looked at him sideways. "Yes," she said, "I will." The wagon rolled on. The sun began its long afternoon descent, throwing their shadows long behind them, pointing like arrows toward the town they were leaving. The road climbed slowly from the flat brush country toward the rougher terrain to the north. Clara felt the shift when they crossed the county line, not in the landscape exactly, but in herself. Something that had been braced against impact for 4 solid months unclenched just slightly. Not fully, not with any certainty, but enough that she could draw a breath that did not feel like preparation for the next blow. She looked down at Rose, asleep against her arm. She looked at Ellie, who was still watching Harper with that careful cataloging attention. She looked at the road ahead. She didn't know this man. She didn't know his land, or his silence, or the story behind the scar on his face. She didn't know if she had made the right choice, or merely traded one kind of uncertainty for another. There was no way to know yet. There was only the road, and the decision already made, and the 2 daughters she had promised Samuel she would keep safe, and together, no matter the cost. The road is long enough, she told herself. The truth of a man shows itself eventually. One way or another she would know. But as the last light of the August sun caught the pale grass on both sides of the road, and turned it briefly gold, and Rose slept, and Ellie watched the horizon with the vigilance of a child who has learned that the world requires watching, Cole Harper did something so small that Clara almost missed it. He adjusted his grip on the reins with one hand, and with the other he subtly shifted the canvas behind the bench to create a buffer against the evening wind that was beginning to pick up, angling it precisely to shelter the sleeping child without drawing attention to what he was doing. He didn't look at Clara afterward. He didn't say a word. He simply drove. And Clara looked at the sheltered child sleeping against her arm, and she looked at the man beside her, who had just performed an act of quiet protection so habitual it appeared to require no thought at all. And she understood that she was going to need to revise every assumption she had formed in the 20 minutes she'd watched him at the auction. The wagon climbed north into the fading afternoon, carrying the four of them. The silent man, the broken woman, the fierce daughter, and the sleeping child toward a life that none of them could quite picture yet, on land that was hard and beautiful and indifferent, where everything that was going to matter would have to be built from the ground up from nothing by people who had already lost more than they should have had to lose, and were willing against all reasonable expectation to try again. That is how it began. Not with a promise, and not with certainty, and not with anything a person could call hope without feeling foolish. It began with a canvas windbreak, and a sleeping child, and a man who did a quiet thing and asked nothing for it. Which is when you think about it how most things worth having have always begun. The ranch didn't look like salvation. Clara had prepared herself for difficult. She had not prepared herself for the particular quality of silence that greeted them when the wagon finally stopped. After 3 days of hard travel, a silence so complete that Rose reached up and tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Mama, is this the end of the world?" Cole Harper climbed down from the wagon and tied the horses without answering, because he hadn't heard the question, and Clara looked at the structure before them and felt the last remnant of her composed acceptance begin to crack at the edges. "It needs work," Cole said without turning around, as though that covered it. "Yes," Clara said. "I can see that." Ellie stood beside the wagon with her arms crossed and looked from the ranch house to Cole Harper's back, and then to her mother with an expression that said very clearly that she was reserving judgment, but the judgment was not going to be favorable. Cole turned then and looked at them, the three of them standing in a line by the wagon road, dirty and tired in a way that went past physical, and something moved across his face that Clara was beginning to recognize as the closest thing he had to discomfort. "The main room is sound," he said. "The back room is dry. I'll take the barn. Mr. Harper, you and the girls take the house." He lifted a supply crate from the wagon bed. "That's not up for discussion." He carried the crate inside without waiting for a response. Ellie looked at Clara. "He's strange," she said. "He's private," Clara said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Clara picked up the smaller bag and put it in Ellie's arms. "Yes, now come on." The first week was the strangest week of Clara's life, and she had lived through some weeks that would qualify as genuinely strange. Cole Harper rose before the sun every morning and was working before she built the first fire. He came in for meals, ate quickly and quietly, thanked her in exactly 3 words, "Good, thank you, ma'am," and returned outside. He did not make small talk. He did not ask questions. He did not appear to notice whether anyone else in the house was happy or frightened or struggling. And Clara began to wonder in the small hours when the Montana wind pushed against the walls and Rose made soft sounds in her sleep beside her, whether she had simply traded a public humiliation for a private one. Then she found the berries. The second morning, Rose came inside from the porch with both hands full of wild berries arranged in a folded piece of cloth, her eyes wide with the particular brightness of a child who has received something unexpected. "They were on the step," Rose said. "In a little bundle. Who put them there?" Clara looked out toward the barn. Cole Harper was moving between the fence posts in the early light with a post hole digger, working steadily, not looking toward the house. "I don't know," Clara said, but she did know. She stood at the window and watched him work and recalculated everything she thought she understood about the situation. The third morning, Ellie came to Clara with the shoes she'd been wearing since Red Hollow. The left one had a split along the sole that Clara had been wrapping with a strip of cloth to hold together. Except when Ellie held them up, the sole was no longer split. It had been stitched closed with strong thread, neatly and firmly, the kind of repair that would hold for months. Ellie stared at the shoes. Then she stared at Clara. "He did this." "I expect so." "He didn't say anything about it." "No." Ellie put the shoes on and laced them up and walked to the door and pushed it open and stood there looking across the yard at the barn for a long moment. Then she pulled the door closed and came back inside and sat down at the table and picked up her fork with the expression of someone who has been given information that significantly complicates their existing theory. "He's still strange," she said. "Eat your breakfast," Clara said. But on the fifth day, Ellie did something that made Clara's heart stop cold. Cole came in from the north pasture at midday with the kind of tiredness that showed in the set of his shoulders rather than his face, and he sat down at the table and Clara put the plate in front of him, and he had just picked up his fork when Ellie looked directly at him and said, "You fixed my shoes." Cole looked at her. "You could have told me," Ellie said. "I would have said thank you." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Cole said, "I know." "Then why didn't you?" Cole set his fork down and looked at Ellie with that same genuine seriousness he'd shown at the auction. The seriousness that treated her like a person rather than a child to be managed. "Because I didn't do it to be thanked," he said. "I did it because the shoe was broken." Ellie stared at him. "That's the whole reason." "That's the whole reason." Another silence, shorter this time. "Okay," Ellie said. "Well, thank you anyway." "You're welcome," Cole said. He picked up his fork again. Clara turned back to the stove so neither of them would see her face. It was Rose, though, who broke through what Clara could only describe as the fortress of the man. Rose did not appear to notice that Cole Harper was not the kind of person you simply decided to follow around. She followed him anyway. She appeared in the barn when he was working on the tack. She stood at the paddock fence, watching him move the horses with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes. She asked questions with the relentless frequency of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned that some people find questions exhausting. "What's that tool called?" "A hoof pick." "What does it do?" "Cleans the horse's feet." "Do horses like that?" "They tolerate it." "Do you like doing it?" A pause. "It needs doing." "That's not the same as liking it." Cole looked down at her from the other side of the horse's flank. "No," he said. "It's not." Rose considered this. "Papa said some things need doing whether you like them or not, but that you should try to find a thing you like in everything you do, because otherwise your whole life is just surviving, and surviving is different from living." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Your father was a thoughtful man." "He thought about everything," Rose said. "Sometimes Mama had to tell him to stop thinking and just eat his supper." And Cole Harper, the man Clara had not once seen smile in 2 weeks, made a sound that was almost not quite, but almost a laugh. Clara heard it from the doorway of the barn where she'd come looking for Rose, and she stayed very still and did not make herself known. And she watched her 7-year-old daughter standing in the straw with this scarred, silent, grief-carved man. And she felt something shift in the whole picture she'd been carrying of what their life here might become. That was the first crack. The second one came 10 days later, and it was wider. Clara had begun to notice that no matter how much food she prepared, Cole ate less than his share. She'd thought at first it was simply his appetite. But then she started watching more carefully and realized he was doing the arithmetic before he sat down, gauging what was on the table, estimating what the girls would need, adjusting his own portion without comment or drama, eating like a man who has simply decided that other people's hunger matters more than his own. She confronted him about it the night after she figured it out. She waited until the girls were asleep, and she came out to the porch where he was sitting in the dark, and she said without preamble, "You're shorting yourself at meals." Cole looked at her. "I'm fine." "That's not what I said. I said you're giving yourself less than your share so the girls have more." "They're growing," he said. "They need more. So do you. You're working from before sunup to after dark." He looked back out at the darkness beyond the porch. "I've worked on less." "Cole." She had not called him by his first name before. She heard herself do it and kept going. "I can make enough food for all 4 of us. That's not a hardship. But you have to let me know what you need." He was quiet for a moment. In the darkness, she could see the edge of his profile, the line of his jaw, the scar catching faint moonlight. "You've got enough to manage," he said. "I'm not going to add to it." "Feeding you is not adding to it. That's just how a household works." He turned and looked at her. Then and there was something in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Something raw, and quickly covered the way a person covers a wound they don't want examined. "All right," he said quietly. "Thank you, Clara." Her name, not ma'am, her name. She went inside before he could see what that did to her face. The storm came at the end of the third week. It arrived in the late afternoon as a darkness on the western edge of the sky, and by nightfall it was hammering the ranch with the particular fury that Montana Territory storms reserve for August rain, horizontal lightning that turned everything briefly brutally white thunder that came without warning and shook the walls. Rose woke screaming. Clara was there in seconds, and Ellie was sitting up in the dark on the other side of the bed, and Clara pulled Rose close and said, "It's all right. It's just thunder. You're safe." And Rose clung to her with both hands and buried her face in her neck and shook. The door opened. Cole stood in the doorway, with a lamp fully dressed, having apparently not been asleep. He looked at the three of them and said, "Everybody accounted for." "She's frightened," Clara said. He nodded. He didn't leave. He also didn't come in. He stood in the doorway with the lamp, and the storm howled beyond the walls, and Rose slowly loosened her grip and turned her head to look at him. "Mr. Harper," Rose said, her voice still thick with tears. "Why do you always look sad when people laugh?" The question landed in the room like something physical. Clara looked at her daughter, and then at Cole, and Cole had gone very still in the doorway, the lamp in his hand, the storm at his back. "Rose," Clara started. "I noticed it in town," Rose said, with the directness of the very young who do not yet know that some things should not be said aloud. "When those men at the auction were laughing at Mama, you looked sad, not angry, sad, like you remembered something." Cole stood in the doorway for a long moment. The lamp threw his shadow large against the wall behind him. He walked in and set the lamp on the dresser. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat in it, forearms on his knees, and he looked at Rose with an expression that Clara had no category for. "I had a daughter," he said. "About your size. Little smaller, maybe." Rose waited. "Her name was June." He stopped. He started again. "And I had a wife. Her name was Anna." He was looking at his hands now. "I was away. The war. Raiding party came through while I was gone. By the time I got home..." He stopped again. This time it took longer to start. "I never laughed much after that. When I hear laughing, I think of June because she laughed at everything. Every small thing, like the whole world was funny to her." The storm outside was the only sound for a moment. Rose climbed down from the bed. Clara reached for her automatically, and then stopped herself, because she understood, watching her daughter, that what was about to happen needed to happen without interference. Rose walked across the room and stood in front of Cole Harper and put her small hand on his arm. "That's the saddest thing I ever heard," she said. "I'm very sorry about June and Anna." Cole looked at the child's hand on his arm. His jaw tightened. A muscle moved in his cheek. "Thank you, Rose," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. "Is that why you live alone in the mountains?" "Yes. Because you didn't think you deserved to have people again." The silence that followed was the heaviest one Clara had ever sat inside. "Something like that," Cole said. Rose tilted her head and considered this with the gravity of a very old soul in a very small body. "That doesn't seem right," she said. "June would probably be sad if she knew you were alone." Cole pressed his lips together. He looked away toward the wall, and Clara could see the effort it cost him to hold himself together in front of a 7-year-old who had just reached directly into the most broken part of him without even knowing she was doing it. "Probably," he agreed. His voice was barely audible now. "You should come eat breakfast with us tomorrow," Rose said. "Not fast like you usually do, slow, like a family." Ellie from the bed said nothing, but Clara saw her daughter reach up and press the back of her hand to her own mouth just briefly. Cole looked at Rose for a long time. Then he said, "All right." "Okay." Rose climbed back onto the bed and burrowed under the blanket. "Good night, Mr. Harper." He stood. He picked up the lamp. He looked at Clara, and Clara looked at him, and between them passed something that had no name yet, but was no longer the careful, formal distance of two strangers who have made a practical arrangement. "Good night," he said to her quietly. "Good night, Cole." He walked to the door and paused with his back to the room and his hand on the frame, and in the light of the lamp his shadow stretched behind him, all the way to where Clara sat, and she thought not for the first time, but for the first time with any certainty, that grief had not made this man cold. It had made him armored, and armor, unlike coldness, comes off. She heard him cross the main room, and she heard the front door open against the wind and then close again, and the storm pressed its weight against the walls, and Rose was already breathing toward sleep. And Ellie lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, with the expression of someone rearranging a significant amount of information. "Mama," Ellie said quietly. "I know," Clara said. "He's not what I thought." "No." Clara lay back and pulled the blanket up. "He's not what either of us thought." Outside, the storm worked itself toward exhaustion, and somewhere across the yard in the barn, a man who had spent years building walls against everything, Soft sat alone with the memory of a little girl who laughed at every small thing, and for the first time in a very long time, did not try to bury it. The next morning, Cole Harper came to breakfast slow, the way Rose had asked him to. He sat down and did not rush, and when Rose passed him the biscuits, she said, "See, this is nicer," and Cole said, "Yes." And Ellie looked at him over her coffee cup with her careful eyes and said nothing, which from Ellie was as close to an endorsement as anyone was going to get. Clara watched the four of them at the table and thought, "We are building something here. I don't know what to call it yet, but we are building it." She had not yet learned about Victor Grayson. She had not yet learned what was coming. But that morning, with the storm washed out and the light clean through the windows, and her daughters, and this complicated, scarred, slowly defrosting man sitting at the same table, eating breakfast. Unhurried that morning for the first time since Samuel died, Clara Bennett let herself feel something she had told herself she could no longer afford. She let herself feel like maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right after all. The good mornings did not last. They never do when something is coming that doesn't care how carefully you've built your peace. Victor Grayson arrived on a Thursday in the third week of September, and Clara knew before he opened his mouth that he was the kind of man who had never in his life been told no by anyone who couldn't afford the consequences. He rode up with two men behind him on horses that cost more than most families earned in a year, and he dismounted in the yard with the unhurried ease of someone who has already decided how the conversation ends. Cole came out of the barn and stopped when he saw them. Something in his posture changed. Not fear. Clara had already learned that Cole Harper did not carry fear the way other men did, but a readiness, the kind that settles into a person's bones before they know they need it. "Harper," Grayson said. He was a large man, well dressed for the territory, with the particular confidence of someone who has confused wealth with righteousness for so long he can no longer tell the difference. "Been meaning to come by." "I know what you've been meaning," Cole said. "Say it and go." Grayson smiled like a man who enjoys being told to get to the point because it gives him permission to be direct about ugly things. "This land sits on the only clean river access between my northern and southern ranges. I've been patient about that. But I'm a reasonable man, so I'm here to make you a fair offer before things get complicated. This land isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Harper. It's just a matter of finding the right number. There isn't a number." Grayson's smile didn't waver. He turned his head slowly and looked at the house at the window where Clara had been standing, and she knew he could see her, knew he was looking deliberately, and then he looked at the yard where Rose's small pair of boots sat on the porch step, and then he looked back at Cole. "You've got people here now," he said. "That changes things." Cole stepped forward one step. Just one. "If you're about to say what I think you're about to say, I need you to think very carefully about whether you want to finish that sentence." Grayson looked at him. Something passed across his face, not fear exactly, but its cousin, the flicker of a man who recognizes genuine danger and decides to step around it rather than through it. For now, I'm just observing, Grayson said pleasantly. A man with people to protect has more to lose than a man alone. That's not a threat. That's arithmetic. He settled his hat and walked back to his horse. I'll give you 2 weeks to reconsider. The offer is generous. After that, he swung into the saddle. Well, 2 weeks, Harper. He rode out without looking back. Cole stood in the yard until the sound of hoofbeats faded, and then he turned and walked to the house, and Clara was already at the door when he got there. How bad? She asked. He looked at her directly. One of the things she had come to value most about Cole Harper was that he did not soften information for her benefit. He treated her, she had noticed, the same way he treated Ellie, like someone entitled to the unvarnished truth. Victor Grayson has run 3 families off their land in the last 2 years, he said. One of them had the deed. The deed didn't matter. And the other 2, their houses burned. Clara absorbed this. In the kitchen behind her, she could hear Rose singing to herself some small, tuneless song she'd been inventing all week. The sound of it made her chest hurt. What do we do? She asked. I send you and the girls south to... No. Cole stopped. No. Clara said again, quieter, but no less certain. We are not running again. I am done running. She held his gaze. This is our home. My daughters have had one home taken from them already by men who decided their needs mattered more than ours. That is not happening twice. Cole looked at her for a long moment. If it comes to a fight, then we fight. She squared her shoulders. Can you teach me to shoot properly, not just load and aim? Shoot. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, but something close to recognition. The look of a man who has just seen something in a person that changes the shape of the whole picture. Yes, he said. I can teach you. They didn't tell Ellie. Except Ellie, who had inherited from somewhere Clara suspected Samuel, an almost supernatural ability to read a room, came to her mother that night and said very quietly, That man who came today, he's going to try to take the ranch. Clara started to say something reassuring. Don't, Ellie said. I'm 12, Mama, not 6. Tell me the truth. Clara looked at her daughter. At the set of her jaw so much like Samuel's. At the steady, unflinching eyes. Yes, Clara said. He might try. Then we don't let him. That's what we're working on. Ellie nodded slowly. Does Cole know how to handle men like that? He does. Another nod. Okay. She turned toward the bedroom and then stopped. Mama, we're not going to lose this too. You hear me? We're not. Clara pulled her daughter into her arms and held on. Ellie let her, which was itself a significant act from a 12-year-old who had been conducting herself with the dignity of someone twice her age for the better part of 4 months. I hear you, Clara said. The 2 weeks passed. The way time passes when you're waiting for something bad, both too fast and too slow, each ordinary moment carrying the weight of what might be coming. Cole taught Clara to shoot in the north pasture every afternoon, and she was not a natural, but she was relentless, and by the end of the first week, she could hit a fence post at 40 yards with consistency that made Cole say without theatrical praise, good, again. Rose, who knew nothing, spent those 2 weeks teaching Cole to identify bird calls. That one's a meadowlark, she told him one afternoon, standing on the fence rail beside him with both hands cupped around her ears. Papa said if you hear a meadowlark, the day is going to be good. Is that right? Cole said. Do you believe it? He was quiet for a moment. I'm starting to. Rose beamed at him with the full force of a 7-year-old who has just received excellent news. Good, she said, because I've been hearing one every morning for 2 weeks, so things should be pretty good around here. Cole looked at her. Clara watched from the doorway and saw something in his face that she had no word for. Something that was grief and gratitude, and something entirely new all at once, layered in a way that only happens to people who have lost nearly everything, and then found themselves against all reasonable expectation, given something precious to lose again. The attack came on a Saturday night, 17 days after Grayson's visit. Clara heard the horses first. She was already half awake. She'd been sleeping lightly for 2 weeks, some animal part of her brain running a constant low-level watch, and the sound of multiple riders approaching fast in the dark brought her fully upright before she was conscious of moving. She was at Cole's door in 4 steps. "They're coming." He was already up, already dressed. He handed her the rifle without a word, the one they'd been practicing with, and took the larger one from the wall himself. "Girls in the cellar," he said. "Ellie. We'll argue about it. Tell her it's her job to protect Rose. She'll go." He was right. Ellie argued for exactly 4 seconds before Clara said, "Rose needs you down there." And Ellie picked up her sister and moved. The first explosion hit the barn. The force of it shook the house walls, and Rose screamed from the cellar, and Clara heard Ellie say sharp and immediate, "I've got you! I've got you!" And then there was no more time for listening, because the gunfire started. It came from 3 directions. Clara understood this immediately. She had listened when Cole talked about how men like Grayson operated, how they spread their force to maximize panic, and she pressed herself against the interior wall, the way he'd told her, and breathed through the instinct to run. Cole was at the front window. 4 riders, north and east, 2 more coming around the south. Glass shattered. Clara felt the air of it pass her face. "You all right?" Cole called. "Yes." She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she was standing, and the rifle was in her hands, and those were the relevant facts. "What do I do?" "South window. Anyone comes through that door, you do not hesitate." She moved to the south window. Outside the barn was fully burning now, and the light it threw was savage and orange, and it lit the yard like a stage, and she could see the men on horseback, moving in the chaos. They'd created rifles up, and Cole firing from the front with the controlled, precise rhythm of someone who learned to shoot in a war and never forgot. A man on foot came around the south corner. Clara's whole body went cold. He was heading for the cellar door. He knew where the cellar door was. He was heading directly for it with intention and everything. Clara Bennett was every molecule of fear and love and maternal ferocity that had kept her and her daughters alive through 4 months of humiliation and loss, rose up in her like a wave. She threw open the south window. "Stop!" The man looked up startled. She fired. He went down. She stood at the window with the rifle still raised and her hands completely steady, steadier than she'd expected, steadier than they'd been in months, and the only sound she could make sense of in that moment was her own breathing and the ongoing fire from the front of the house where Cole was still working. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "Harper." Victor Grayson's voice, unhurried even now, even here, even with his men falling. "This ends one way. You know that." Cole did not answer. "Your wife is brave," Grayson called. "I'll give her that. But brave doesn't win this. Come out and we settle it, man to man. You have my word." From inside the house, Cole glanced at Clara. She shook her head. He shook his back. She realized he had no intention of going out, that he'd been reading Grayson the same way she had. But then there was movement at the east side, and Cole swung the rifle, and in the moment he was turned, Grayson came through the front door. He came through it with a pistol already leveled at Cole's back, and Cole was turned, and Clara had less than a second of understanding before her body moved independently of her mind. She spun. She raised the rifle. She fired. The shot hit Victor Grayson in the chest. He stopped moving. The pistol dropped first. Then he went down slowly in the way of large men who are not accustomed to falling, and he hit the floor of the house that he had intended to burn, and he did not get up. Silence. Not complete silence. The barn was still burning outside, and somewhere a horse was moving and the wind was doing what Montana wind always does, but the gunfire stopped. One by one it stopped, and Clara understood without being told that Grayson's men were the kind that only fight for a paycheck, and the paycheck was done. She stood in the middle of the room with the rifle at her side and Grayson on the floor, and the burning light coming through every window, and Cole turned from the east wall and looked at her. He crossed the room in 4 strides. His hands came up to her face, both of them gently like something fragile. and he looked at her the way he'd looked at Rose the night she pressed her hand on his arm, with that same raw, unguarded openness that came out of him only in the moments when the armor slipped. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "Are you?" "No." They stood like that for a moment, his hands on her face and hers at her sides, with the rifle still in them, and the fire outside did what fires do, and the night did what nights do, and neither of them said the things they were thinking, because there would be time for those things, or there wouldn't be. But either way, this was not the moment. "The girls," Clara said. Cole stepped back. "I'll get them." He pulled the cellar door open and called down, and Rose's voice came up immediately. "Is it over? Is Mama okay? Is everyone okay?" And Cole said, "Come on up, little one, it's over." And Rose came up the ladder so fast she nearly fell, and Clara caught her and held on. Ellie came up behind her and stopped at the top of the ladder, and looked at the room, at Grayson on the floor, at the broken window, at her mother, holding Rose, and her face went through about 14 different expressions in the space of 5 seconds. "Mama," she said, "I'm here." "You—" Ellie looked at the rifle still in Clara's hand, at Grayson on the floor, back at Clara. "Yes," Clara said simply. Ellie pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. She crossed the room and put her arms around her mother and sister all at once, and for a while, the three of them just held each other in the burning light while Cole stood near the door and watched the yard and gave them the space to be what they were to each other. After a while, Rose lifted her head from Clara's shoulder and looked at Cole standing by the door. "Mr. Harper," she said. Her voice was still thick. He turned. "You're not going to look sad anymore," she told him. "Because now you have us, and we're going to make sure you hear the meadowlark every morning." Cole Harper stood in the doorway of his burning ranch on a Saturday night in September, with the remains of an attack around him and a dead man on the floor, and the woman who had saved his life standing 10 feet away, and something happened in his face that Clara had never seen there before. He smiled, not much, not the wide, easy smile of a man who hasn't lost anything. A small, real difficult smile, the kind that has to fight its way through years of scar tissue to get out. But it got out. And when Clara saw it, she understood with absolute certainty that whatever they had built here in the space between a practical arrangement and something neither of them had dared to name yet was not going to be taken from them. Not by Grayson, not by anyone. They had already paid too much for it, and they had only just begun. The morning after a battle is its own kind of brutal. Not because of the damage, though. The damage was real. The barn reduced to charred bones and 2 windows gone, and the front door hanging wrong on its hinges. Not even because of the body that the territorial deputy came to collect before noon, wrapped in canvas, loaded onto a wagon taken away from the ranch that Victor Grayson had decided he needed badly enough to kill for. The morning after was brutal because of the quiet, because the sun came up the way it always does, indifferent and gold, and Rose asked for oatmeal, and Ellie needed water from the well, and the horses required feeding, despite the fact that their shelter was ash, and life ordinary. Relentless, unceremonious life simply continued, and expected everyone to continue with it. Clara was at the stove when the deputy arrived. Sheriff Aldous Crane, a lean man in his 50s with a mustache going gray at the edges, had ridden out from Carver's Crossing with 2 younger men and the careful expression of someone who has learned to withhold judgment until he has more information than he currently possesses. He looked at the burned barn. He looked at the broken windows. He looked at Cole, who met him in the yard with the same unhurried steadiness he brought to everything. "Grayson," the deputy said. Not a question. "His men hit first," Cole said. 3 directions middle of the night, he came through the front door himself with a pistol aimed at my back. Crane nodded slowly. "And the shot that took him." A pause. Cole said, "My wife." Clara heard it from the kitchen doorway. "My wife. Not the woman. Not Mrs. Harper. My wife." She turned back to the stove before anyone could see her face. Crane was quiet for a moment. Then, "Grayson's been operating outside the law in this territory for 4 years. We haven't been able to touch him because nobody who could testify would live long enough to do it." He paused again. "I'm going to rule this self-defense. I'll need a written account from both of you. But I want you to understand, there are men in Carver's Crossing who worked for Grayson who are going to be looking for someone to blame for losing their income." "Let them look," Cole said. Crane studied him. "You're not going to have trouble with me on this, Harper. Grayson was not a good man, and this territory is better without him. But watch yourself for a while." "I've been watching myself for 15 years, Cole said. "I know how it's done." The deputy took his men and went. Rose, who had been sitting on the porch step through all of this, with her knees pulled up, waited until the hoofbeats faded, and then said, "Is it really over?" "The worst of it," Cole said. "What about the rest of it?" He looked at her. "We rebuild." Rose nodded with the gravity of a child who has learned that some answers are not reassuring, but are still the right ones. "Okay," she said. "I can help carry things." "I know you can." The barn took 3 weeks to begin and 6 to finish. Cole worked it the way he worked everything systematically, without complaint, dawn to dusk. But something was different now. Ellie worked beside him. It started on the second day when Ellie appeared at the lumber pile without asking, and picked up a board and waited for direction with the particular expression of someone who has decided to be useful and is not interested in being told they're not needed. Cole looked at her for about 3 seconds. Then he said, "Hold it level on the left side," and that was that. They developed over those weeks a working language that Clara watched with a kind of quiet amazement. It was not the language of a father and daughter, not yet, not exactly, but it was something. Cole explained things once and trusted that she'd understood. Ellie asked questions when she didn't, and stayed quiet when she did. He never talked down to her. She never pretended to know things she didn't. By the end of the 3rd week, they could work side by side for an hour in complete silence. And it was not uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have decided, without making any announcement about it, to trust each other. One evening, Clara brought them both water at the work site and found them standing back looking at what they'd built Ellie with a smear of sawdust across her cheek and her arms crossed in unconscious mimicry of the way Cole stood, and Cole looking at the frame with an expression so close to pride that Clara had to look away for a moment. "It's going to be good," Ellie said. "Better than before," Cole agreed. Ellie glanced at him sideways. "Papa would have liked doing this. He wasn't very good at building things, but he liked trying." Cole didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Sounds like he was a man who didn't let not being good at something stop him." "Exactly," Ellie said. "That's exactly what he was." She handed her empty cup back to Clara and went back to work, and Cole watched her go, and then looked at Clara with that expression she had no word for, yet the one that lived between gratitude and grief, and something newer than either. "She's something," he said quietly. "She's her father's daughter," Clara said, "and mine on the stubborn days." Cole almost smiled. "Must be a lot of stubborn days. You have no idea." He did smile then briefly, and looked back at the barn frame, and Clara carried the cups back to the house, and thought about how strange it was that out of everything the last months had stripped away the house, the land, the safety, the dignity. What had been left was something she couldn't have planned and wouldn't have predicted, something that was still forming, still fragile, but undeniably alive. It was Rose who found the cross. She'd been following Cole on one of his early morning walks. He took them when he couldn't sleep, which Clara had gathered was often, and she came back to the house holding his hand, with the serious look she reserved for important matters, and said, "Mama Cole has a little cross out by the big spruce tree, with 2 names on it, June and Anna. He made it himself." Clara looked at Cole. He had the expression of a man who has been gently caught. "I carry it with me," he said simply. "Wherever I am, it needs to be somewhere." Clara thought about that for the rest of the day. About a man who had spent years alone moving from place to place with a small wooden cross in his pack, setting it in the ground wherever he stopped, so that his dead wife and daughter always had a place in the landscape of wherever he was. About what that said about the quality of his grief. about what it said about the quality of his love. That evening, she waited until the girls were in bed, and she went out to where he was sitting on the porch, and she sat beside him and said without preamble, "Tell me about Anna." Cole looked out into the dark for a moment. "She used to argue with me about everything," he said finally. "She was always right, which was irritating." The ghost of something that might have been a smile. June had her laugh, exactly her laugh. First time I heard June laugh as a baby, I thought... He stopped, started again. "I thought the whole world was going to be all right." "She sounds extraordinary," Clara said. "She was ordinary in all the best ways," Cole said. "That's what I miss most. The ordinary." He paused. "I used to think ordinary was something you got through on the way to something important. I was wrong about that." Clara was quiet for a moment. The porch boards held them both, and the dark held everything else. "Samuel was like that," she said. "He made ordinary feel like enough. I didn't know how rare that was until he was gone." They sat together in the particular companionship of two people who have each lost the same category of thing, and the silence was not lonely. Then Cole said, "I moved my things into the house today, the spare room." Clara turned to look at him. "If that's all right," he said. He was looking at her steadily, the way he said difficult things directly, without decoration. "The spare room," Clara said. "Yes." Not unless you want something different." He held her gaze. "That's your decision. I'm not going to push anything. But I'm done sleeping in the barn." Clara looked at him for a long moment. At the scar on his jaw. At the winter sky eyes that had learned in the last 2 months to carry something besides cold. At the man who fixed shoes without mentioning it and left berries on steps and ate less than his share and put a canvas windbreak behind the wagon bench for a sleeping child. "The spare room is fine for now," she said. "For now." He nodded. "All right." "Cole." He looked at her. "Ask me," she said. "When you're ready, ask me properly." Something moved across his face, something large and carefully controlled. "I will," he said. He did not ask that night. He waited 11 more days, and Clara respected him for it, because it told her that he understood asking properly required not doing it before you were certain, and that a man who rushes a question like that is not asking because he means it, but because he wants the answer. He asked on a Sunday. They were down by the river, all 4 of them, because Rose had declared Sunday afternoons to be family fishing time. A declaration nobody had argued with, and Rose had fallen asleep in the grass with a line in the water. And Ellie had wandered upstream, looking for better current, and Cole and Clara stood on the bank with lines in the water and the September sun on their faces. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "I know I'm not an easy man," he said. "I know I came into your life in a way that wasn't..." He paused, gathering. "I know there's nothing about the beginning of this that was what it should have been for a woman like you. You deserved better than an auction platform and a stranger with a scar and a ranch at the end of the world." "Cole, let me finish." He looked at the water. "I want to ask you to stay, not because of the arrangement, not because of the land or the practicality of it. I want to ask you to stay because..." He looked at her. "Because when I look at this place now, I see you in it. I see you and Ellie and Rose, and I can't make the picture work without all 3 of you, and I don't want to." Clara's throat tightened. "So I'm asking," he said, "if you'll stay. As my wife. A real one. Not a practical arrangement." He held her gaze without flinching. "If you'll have me." Clara thought about standing on that auction platform in August with her daughters pressing against her sides. She thought about $40. She thought about Margaret Holloway's voice carrying across the street. She thought about Samuel, who she had loved truly and lost completely, and would never stop grieving. She thought about what she'd told herself that day, that she would not cry, that she would not break, and she thought about how she hadn't, until now. The tears came without warning and without drama, the way long-held things come when the ground is finally safe enough to release them. Not sobs, Just tears, steady and real, running down her face in the September sun. Cole took one step toward her. "Clara." "I'm all right," she said. "I'm all right. This is the good kind." He stood very close and didn't touch her and didn't look away, which was exactly right, which was the only thing that would have been right. "Yes," she said when she could. "Yes, I'll stay." Cole reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, just held it the way a person holds something they intend to keep. From upstream, Ellie's voice. "Did something happen? Why is Mama crying?" Rose's voice, sleepy from the grass. "The good kind or the bad kind?" "The good kind," Cole called back, Rose's voice. "Oh good, those are fine." A pause. "Did you ask her?" Cole looked at Clara. Clara looked at Cole. "Yes," he called. "And she said yes?" "She said yes." The sound of Rose's feet hitting the grass. The sound of her running. Then small arms around both of them at once, or as much of both of them as 7-year-old arms could manage, and Rose's face pressed against their joined hands. "Finally," Rose said. Ellie arrived at a more dignified pace. She stopped a few feet away and looked at them, at Cole specifically, with those measuring eyes that had been evaluating him since the first day. Clara watched her daughter take the full measure of the man standing beside her mother. Then Ellie said, "Pa." Not as a question. Not with any ceremony. Just the word placed carefully into the air between them, like something she'd been holding and had decided was time to put down in the right place. Cole went very still. "If that's all right," Ellie said. The words were casual. Her voice was not. Cole cleared his throat. He looked at Ellie for a long moment, and Clara could see exactly what it cost him to stay composed. The jaw working, the eyes bright with something he was managing only barely. "That's all right," he said. His voice came out rougher than usual. "That's more than all right, Ellie." Ellie nodded once, satisfied. She came forward and stood beside them on the bank, and the four of them stood at the river in the Sunday afternoon sun, the scarred cowboy and the widow and the fierce girl, and the small one who had made all of them be honest with each other, and for a long time nobody said anything at all. The river ran over the rocks the way it always had, paying no attention to the people on its banks. And the meadowlarks did what meadowlarks do, and somewhere behind them the ranch they had defended and were still rebuilding held its ground on the hill. Clara looked at the three people standing beside her and thought about what she'd believed 4 months ago, standing on an auction platform in August heat, that everything worth having was gone, that what remained was surviving, that the difference between surviving and living was a luxury she could no longer afford. She had been wrong about that. Samuel had known it. He'd known it his whole life, and he'd tried to tell her, and she understood it now in a way she hadn't when he was alive to say it, not because grief had taught her, but because these three people standing beside her, improbable and scarred and stubborn, and entirely hers, were teaching her something new every single day. Rose tugged Cole's sleeve. "Pa," she said, trying the word out herself, now testing its weight. "If we're a family, we need that dog." Cole looked down at her. "I believe I promised you that." "You did." Rose was very serious. "A promise is a promise." "It is," Cole agreed. "We'll go to town next week." Rose's face did the thing it did when something fully satisfied her, all the gravity dropping away at once, replaced by pure, uncomplicated light. She turned back to her fishing line and plopped back down in the grass as though the matter was settled, because as far as she was concerned, it was. Ellie looked at Cole. "She's going to name it something ridiculous," she said. "Probably," Cole agreed. "And you're going to let her." He looked at Ellie with the straightforward honesty he always gave her. "Probably," he said again. Ellie shook her head, but the corner of her mouth moved. Clara recognized it because she'd seen it on Samuel's face for 11 years, the particular suppressed smile of someone who is pretending not to be amused and is not fooling anyone. It was the first time she'd seen it on Ellie's face, and it looked exactly right there. The dog's name was Cornbread, Rose had announced this in the wagon on the way back from Carver's Crossing, holding the puppy against her chest, with the finality of someone who has given the matter tremendous thought and is not open to further discussion. Cole had looked at Clara. Clara had looked at Cole. Ellie had stared out the back of the wagon at the road behind them, with the expression of someone who has accepted that certain things are simply beyond their control. "Cornbread," Cole said. "Because he's golden," Rose said. "And because I love cornbread." "Those are both true," Cole said after a moment. "So it's a good name." "It's a name," he said. Cornbread grew into a large, enthusiastic animal, with more energy than sense and an apparently unshakable conviction that he was welcome in every room of the house at all times. Cole, who had said he would see about a dog with the neutrality of a man making no commitments, was observed 3 months later, sitting on the porch in the dark, with Cornbread's head in his lap, talking to the dog in a low voice about nothing in particular, and Clara, who saw this from the window, did not mention it to anyone except Ellie, who said, "I know. I've seen it too. Don't tell Rose, or she'll make it into something. It already was something." But Clara let it be quiet. That was the first winter. By the second spring, things had begun to change in ways none of them had predicted. It started with a woman named Ida Marsh, who arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday morning in April with 2 boys under 10 and a bruise along her jaw that she didn't explain and didn't need to. She'd heard she said that the Harpers took in people who needed a place. Clara and Cole looked at each other on the porch. They had not discussed taking in anyone. They had not put out any word. And yet, here was Ida Marsh, with her 2 boys, and her jaw, and her hands twisted together in front of her, waiting. "Where'd you hear that?" Cole asked. "Carver's Crossing," Ida said. Woman at the general store said, "If you were in trouble, and you had nowhere to go, the Harper Ranch was a place you could try." Cole looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ida Marsh's jaw. At the 2 boys behind her, who were doing what children do when they're frightened, standing very still and watching everything. "Come inside," Clara said. "I'll put coffee on." Cole carried their bags without being asked. That was how it began. By the end of that summer, there were 2 families on the property. The Marshes and a widower named Thomas Reed, who had lost his farm to the same kind of institutional arithmetic that had taken Clara's house, and who was rebuilding with the particular grim determination of a man who has nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing to be cautious about. Cole put Reed to work on the north fence. Within 2 weeks, Reed was someone Cole trusted with the horses, which Clara had come to understand was a higher endorsement than most people received in a lifetime. The ranch grew. Not extravagantly, not with any grand plan, just organically, the way things grow when they're given the right conditions, and nobody tries to rush them. A second structure went up, then a third. Cole designed them, and Ellie, who was 15 now, and had absorbed 2 years of construction knowledge working beside him, was as likely to be found with a level in her hand as a dishcloth. "She's going to build something remarkable someday," Cole told Clara one evening. "She already is," Clara said. He looked at her. "She's building herself," Clara said. "That's the most remarkable thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're right." He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, which made it land harder. "You usually are." "I know," Clara said. "You're getting better at noticing." The corner of his mouth moved. After 3 years, that small movement had become one of her favorite things in the world. The telegram arrived on a Wednesday in the 4th year. It came from Red Hollow, Texas, which was a name Clara had not spoken aloud since the day she left it, and it was addressed to Mrs. Clara Harper, which was still after 3 years a thing that made her pause every time she saw it written out. She opened it at the kitchen table while Cole stood by the door. She read it twice, then she set it down. "What is it?" Cole asked. "It's from the Carver's Crossing Courier," she said. "They want to do a piece about the ranch, about—" She paused. "About us." "About the ranch," Cole said. "About the ranch. And apparently—" She looked at the telegram again. "About the story. Someone in Carver's Crossing talked to someone in Red Hollow, and the story traveled, and now a newspaper in Denver has picked it up, and they want to—" She stopped. "Cole." "I know. They want to call it The Cowboy Who Married the Woman Nobody Wanted." Silence. "That's not the right title," Clara said. "No," Cole said. "It isn't." She looked at him. "It wasn't about you choosing me. That's the smallest part of the story." "I know what the story is," he said quietly. "And so does anyone who's been paying attention." Clara was quiet for the moment. Then, "There's something else in the telegram. There's a gathering being organized in Carver's Crossing, a summer assembly. They're asking if I would speak." Cole didn't hesitate. "You should." "I've never spoken in front of Clara." He crossed the room and sat across from her and looked at her directly. "You stood on an auction platform in front of every person who'd ever mocked you, and you didn't break. You held a rifle in the dark while men were shooting at your house, and you didn't break. You've built—" He gestured, taking in the walls of the house, the sounds of the property outside, all of it. "You've built this. If you can do those things, you can stand in front of a crowd and tell the truth." She looked at him for a long moment. "What if the truth isn't what they want to hear?" "Then it's still the truth," he said. "That's why it needs saying." 2 weeks before the gathering, Margaret Holloway came. Clara was hanging washing when she heard the wagon, and she turned and recognized the woman immediately, older, a little thinner, but unmistakably Margaret Holloway from Red Hollow, who had taught Sunday school to Ellie and Rose, and who had said loud enough for the whole street to hear that she didn't know why anyone would take on that much. Clara stood very still. Ellie came out of the barn behind her. She recognized Margaret too. Clara could tell by the set of her jaw, which she had inherited from Samuel, but had been refining on her own terms for 17 years. "Mama," Ellie said quietly. "I see her." Margaret climbed down from the wagon, with the careful movements of a woman who knows she is not welcome, and has come anyway because she has decided it's necessary. She stopped 10 feet away and looked at Clara, and then she looked at what surrounded Clara, the working ranch, the 2 families in the yard, the children, the barn. Cole and Ellie had built the entirety of it, and something moved across her face that Clara recognized from her own mirror. Reckoning. "Mrs. Harper," Margaret said. "Mrs. Holloway," Clara said. Her voice was level. "This is a long way to come." "Yes." Margaret pressed her lips together. "I read the piece in the Courier, and She stopped, started again. "I've thought about what I said that day for 3 years. What I said and what I didn't do. I stood there and Her voice cracked slightly. "I knew you. I knew your children. And I stood there and said those things, and I have not slept a full night since because of it." Clara looked at her for a long moment. Ellie beside her was absolutely still waiting. "Margaret," Clara said finally, "I'm not going to tell you it didn't hurt. It did. What you said hurt because it came from someone I thought was a friend, and that particular kind of hurt leaves a mark." She paused. "But I also know that cruelty isn't always what a person is. Sometimes it's what they reach for when they're afraid or thoughtless, and it doesn't excuse it, but it means there's room for something else afterward." Margaret's eyes filled. "I'm so sorry, Clara." "I know you are," Clara said. She took a breath. "Come inside. I'll put coffee on." Ellie watched Margaret follow her mother inside. Then she stood in the yard for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, working something through. Cole came up behind her. "You all right?" he asked. "I wanted to be angry," Ellie said. "I've been angry at her for 3 years. And Mama just—" She gestured vaguely toward the house. "She just let it go, like it was something she'd been holding and decided she didn't need anymore." "That's exactly what it was," Cole said. Ellie turned to look at him. "Do you ever do that? Let things go?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm learning to," he said. "Late in life, but learning." Ellie looked back at the house. "She's better at it than either of us." "She's better at most things than either of us," Cole said. "I knew that before I married her." Ellie looked at him sharply. "Before." He held her gaze without flinching. Cole Harper, Ellie said slowly. What does before mean? He was quiet for a moment, and then he told her what he had not told Clara yet, what he had carried without mentioning for 4 years, because he hadn't known how to say it without it sounding like something it wasn't. He had seen Clara in Red Hollow the day before the auction. He'd been passing through on his way north, had stopped at the feed store, had seen her turned away from 3 separate businesses in the same hour, politely, apologetically turned away, but turned away, and had watched her take each rejection with a straightness of spine that told him everything about who she was, without a single word exchanged. He had seen her buy the smallest amount of food the general store would sell, doing the arithmetic in her head, with her lips just barely moving. He had seen her hold herself together in the middle of a street that had already decided she was worth nothing. He had gone back to his camp that night and sat with it for a long time. He had been back in town before the auction even started. Ellie stared at him. You'd already decided? Yes. Before you ever spoke to her? Yes. Why didn't you tell her? Because I was afraid she'd think... He paused. I was afraid she'd think I pitied her. And I didn't. I don't. What I saw that day had nothing to do with pity. Ellie was quiet for a very long moment. You need to tell her, she said. Tonight. Ellie, tonight. Ellie said with the authority of a 17-year-old who has inherited the best of 2 very stubborn people. She deserves to know that someone chose her before the world had finished humiliating her. Not after. Before. She held his gaze. Tell her tonight, Pa. That's not mine to carry. It's hers. He told her that night on the porch, the same porch where he'd told her about the land being threatened, where she'd told him she wasn't going anywhere. He told her simply and completely the way he did everything without softening the edges. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat very still. You were already there, she said. Yes. You watched the whole thing? Yes. And you'd already... Yes. She looked out at the dark that held the ranch and all the people sleeping in it, all the building and healing that had accumulated here over 4 years. Then she looked at him. Why are you telling me now? Because Ellie told me I should have told you on day 1, and she's probably right, and because... He stopped. When he started again, his voice was quieter. Because I want you to know that it was never about that platform. It was never about the auction, or the $40, or the crowd. I saw you the day before. I saw who you were before any of that. And that is what I chose. Clara felt the tears before she decided to cry, which seemed to be how it worked with her. Now the important ones always arrived before she gave them permission. Cole, she said, you don't need to say anything. I want to say something. She turned to look at him fully. I want to say that I know what you gave up when you walked into that crowd. You had built your whole life around being alone, around not having anything to lose. And you walked in anyway and handed over every bit of that safety. She held his gaze. I want you to know that I understand the cost of that, and I want you to know it was worth it, for me too. He reached over and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it by the river, like something he intended to keep. Yes, he said. It was. The gathering in Carver's Crossing drew 200 people on a Saturday in late August, which was more than anyone had expected. Cole stood at the back with Rose at his side, Rose who was 12 now and had opinions about everything, and Cornbread, who had aged into a dignified animal, and sat at Cole's feet with the bearing of someone who understands that today is significant. Ellie stood near the front, watching her mother. Clara stood before the crowd in the dress she'd made herself from the best fabric she could afford, which was not the finest fabric anyone in the territory owned, but fit her body honestly and without apology. And she looked out at 200 faces and found to her own surprise that she was not afraid. She thought about the auction platform. She thought about how different this was and how it was also in some essential way the same a crowd watching her deciding what she was worth. Except this time, she already knew. She already knew, and the crowd was going to find out. I didn't come here to tell you a love story, she said. Her voice carried. Though there is one in here, and it's a true one. and I'm grateful for it every day. But that's not why I'm standing here." The crowd was quiet. "I'm here because 3 years ago, I stood on a platform in Red Hollow, Texas, and let myself be auctioned in front of people who had already decided I was worth less than the land under their feet. Less than $40. Less than the basic dignity a person is owed just for being alive." She paused. "And I want to tell you what I learned from that. Not what I learned about cruelty, because everyone here already knows about cruelty. I want to tell you what I learned about survival." She looked out at the faces. "Surviving does not make you less. That's what they want you to believe, that if you've struggled, if you've lost, if you've been humiliated or poor, or desperate or widowed, or whatever word they use to put you below the line, that you are less than what you were before. That the breaking is permanent." She shook her head. "It is not. I am standing here as proof that it is not." Somewhere near the front, a woman put her hand over her mouth. "My body did not change," Clara said. "I was heavy in Red Hollow, and I'm heavy today, and I will be heavy the rest of my life, and I am telling you plainly that there is not a single version of me that is less valuable because of it. Not one. The world spent a great deal of effort convincing me otherwise, and the world was wrong." She let that land. "I raised 2 daughters through grief and poverty, and I defended my family with a rifle in the dark, and I built a home out of hard land and harder winters, and I did all of that in this body. This exact one." The crowd was completely still. "So if anyone here is carrying the weight of what someone else decided you were worth." Her voice didn't waver. "Put it down. It was never yours to carry. It was theirs, and they were wrong." The applause started before she finished the last word. It grew until it was something physical, something that had weight and texture filling the space. The way that good things fill spaces when they finally have room. At the back of the crowd, Cole Harper stood with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on his wife, and Rose beside him looked up at his face and saw something there that she would remember for the rest of her life. Not the scar, not the winter sky eyes, not the particular set of his jaw, that meant he was feeling something he hadn't put words to yet. She saw that he was crying. He was, not dramatically, not with any performance, just 2 tears tracking down his face in the August sun while he stood in the back of a crowd watching the woman he had chosen before the platform, before the auction, before any of it, stand before 200 people and tell the truth about what she was worth. Rose slipped her hand into his. He looked down at her. "She saved you," Rose said. "Didn't she?" Cole looked back at Clara, who was still at the front of the crowd, being embraced by a woman she didn't know, holding on with both arms, laughing now through whatever was left of the tears. "Yes," he said. "She did." "Good," Rose said with the simplicity of someone who has known this for 4 years and is glad the rest of the world is finally catching up. Ellie appeared at Cole's other side, having worked her way back through the crowd. She stood beside him and watched her mother and didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Papa would have loved this." "He would have," Cole said. "He would have been so proud of her." "He would have." Cole looked at Ellie. "So am I." Ellie pressed her lips together the way she did when something hit her square. Then she nodded once short and certain and turned back to watch her mother. The 3 of them stood together at the back of the crowd, the man who had learned to stop running from love, the girl who had learned to let someone new into the space her father had left, and the girl who had started all of it with a question about berries and a promise about meadowlarks. And they watched Clara Bennett Harper stand in the August sun and claim in front of everyone every piece of herself she had ever been told to be ashamed of. And when Clara finally made her way back through the crowd and reached them flushed and bright-eyed, and more alive than she had looked since the day he first saw her on a street in Red Hollow, doing arithmetic in her head with her lips barely moving, Cole pulled her in without a word and held on, and Rose attached herself to Clara's side, and Ellie put one hand briefly on her mother's back, just once, just for a moment, the way a person touches something precious to make sure it's still there. The legend that came out of that day was not about the cowboy who married the woman nobody wanted. It was about the woman who taught everyone around her, a grief-carved man, 2 daughters, a collection of broken families on a Montana hillside, and 200 strangers on a summer afternoon, that the world's judgment of your worth is not the final word, that the final word belongs only to you. And Clara Bennett Harper, who had stood on an auction platform with $40 as her opening price and her dignity, still stubbornly intact, had known that all along. She had simply needed the right life and the right people to give her the room to say it out loud.